Section 1.6 in Math 099, we're still reviewing Chapter 1. 1.6, Absolute Value Equations and Inequalities. The absolute value of x is defined as, if x is greater than or equal to 0, then the absolute value of x is just x. If x is less than 0, if it's negative, then the absolute value of x is the opposite of x. It's negative x. We need to look at properties of absolute value. The absolute value of a product of two numbers is the same thing as the product of the absolute value. So it doesn't matter whether or not you multiply first or take the absolute value. It works out to be the same thing. Doesn't matter. The absolute value of a quotient of two numbers equals the quotient of the absolute values. So it doesn't matter whether you divide first or you take the absolute value first. You will get the same answer. The absolute value of the opposite of a number is the same as the absolute value of just the number. Those negative signs don't make a bit of difference. So let's simplify, leaving as little as possible inside the absolute value signs. The absolute value of negative 9 times y, we know from our rules above that you can either multiply first or take the absolute value first. Well, let's just go ahead and take the absolute value separately, because when we do that, we get the absolute value of negative 9, and we know for that that is the same as the absolute value of 9, and it is 9. So that gives us 9 times the absolute value of y. We do end up with an absolute value sign, but it seems a little more simplified because the 9 got out, and it's now, we got rid of the negative sign. So 9 times the absolute value of y is a more simplified way of writing that. 6 times b squared, the absolute value of 6 times b squared. That's a product. We know we can take the absolute value of 6 and take the absolute value of b squared separately. That's fine. The absolute value of 6 is 6. And let's think about that b squared. What is the absolute value of b squared? We know that when you square a number, you make it positive for all real numbers. So the absolute value of b squared, since b squared is guaranteed to be positive anyway, the absolute value has to be just that number, just b squared. What about the absolute value of x minus y? We don't have any rules about subtracting, about changing the way that absolute value affects subtracting. So we can't do anything with that. We just have to leave it alone. It is the absolute value of x minus y. There's nothing else that can be done to simplify that. Absolute value principle for any positive number p in any algebraic expression x. The solution of the absolute value of x equals p is those numbers that satisfy the x equals negative p or x equals p. We already talked about that. We worked some example problems where that was true back in section 1.5. The equation, the absolute value of x equals 0, is equivalent to the equation that x is 0. It doesn't matter whether it's absolute value or not if it's equaling 0, because it's not positive, it's not negative, it's 0. So you don't care if you take the absolute value or not. The equation, the absolute value of anything, x, equals negative p, has no solution. You cannot take the absolute value and get a negative answer. It will always be positive. So let's just say that that one has no solution. And that's the end of section 1.6.